asked the class what they thought.
Oh boy.
It was kind of scary.
I bet.
So what you're saying is we're not ready to be brokers giving advice.
No, it's not. You know, it's funny. Funny you say that because I was talking to a guy this morning. He's at Florida State, at University of Florida Law School, and he was doing a project on his, one of his things he wants to do is be a real estate attorney, and he was doing a project and he wanted to interview me about the role of a broker, and I'm not a broker in the true sense of the word. A broker really was traditionally was a person that owned a real estate office, recruited a load of agents, and they all sold together. And then the broker was responsible for additional items, and they still did the budget and the staffing and all the stuff, but they sold themselves. And they would cherry pick, well, they still do, they cherry pick the good deals and then farm out the leads to their agents and create this dependency on the broker. And there used to be that term, whenever you make a recruiting call, the agent would always say, well, I really love my broker. And I got to say that when I first got my real estate license, I kept getting called, my wife was my broker. So I said, I really, really love her. Love her lot. We sleep together every night. And, but people say that, and I think it's because of that dependency model. They grow dependent on their broker for their business and how to do stuff. Well, I think what's interesting about Keller Williams is you have different layers of support. And what was missing in my mind when I was a team leader for about a year, because my wife was recruited to Keller Williams as a team leader, but she had to do a year's no compete. So she put me in the role, stuck her hand up my shirt and told me what to say. And, so I actually can say I was a team leader for you. I wasn't a very good one, but I did it. But I noticed that from with my background, I noticed there was these agents had this thirst for knowledge, and there was no one really in the market center that could give them a correct answer. And I don't mean that big-headedly. The people that were giving them answers were likely doing it wrong for 30 years. I have agents going, I've been doing this stuff for 30 years. Well, you've been doing it wrong for 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you're doing it wrong. And you can get away with things for 30 years. So we were perpetuating this bad practice. And then when we came up with this idea to really have a resource broker rather than a broker owner, someone that they had these productivity people and they had these compliance person, but there was no real training for them. So what's evolved is, I think, it's been good for the team leaders to be able to have that resource and then be able to recruit to it. And today I'm actually have a call this afternoon with a team that went to EXP, and they want to interview me before coming to Keller Williams, because the biggest flaw that they found at EXP is that there's absolutely no resource for them to ask. Not so much legal questions, because you can pick up the phone and call the legal hotline and get, what does this mean? But it's a tactical question. This is the situation we've got. How can we legally get through it? So it's definitely interesting. I find it interesting anyway. I filled enough time for everyone to get in their seats, the warm-up act, and so I'm sure we have people on Zoom as well. What we're going to do this afternoon, I'm just going to take an hour, and we're going to just go through some of the things that are happening out there. We talked a lot at the, I think everyone that's here was at the team meeting. We talked a lot about multiple offers and exploratory and competing offers and highest and best and all that nonsense. So we want to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that are going on out there. The one thing I do want to talk about is fair housing. April was Fair Housing Month for the whole nation, and brought up one of the things that was high on our priority list was to get the message out to agents who were in property management, or indeed working with tenants, or going out and looking for properties for rent with tenants. And I put in a Google search, a Zillow search for the word felony and felon and felonious and any other word you think of to felony. I was shocked at the amount of listings that were on Zillow that actually mentioned felonies in the listing. That's a clear a violation of fair housing, and I say clear in inverted commas, because it doesn't specifically say that felons are protected, but there's a disparate impact on felons if they can't get housing because of a felony conviction. Now, you know, if you read my biography, you know, for my first 15 years of my career, I was a police officer, and in England, they're just very polite people. You're under arrest. Please come with me. Here's some handcuffs. Put them on. I'm sure they're comfortable. And you know, we're kind of, it was back then. It was a kind of thinking man's thing. And I thought my natural reaction when I read, you know, like felons, you know, got paid. Well, actually, felons pay. They go to prison and they paid their dues. And when they come out of prison, we have to understand that they no longer should be penalised for the crime they commit. They pay their dues. So
they need a place to live.
They need a place to live. And what happens is, by not giving them the opportunity to have a place to live, there's a cycle of, you know, what they're going to do. They're going to feed their family. And you know, I know I would. I'd be out there, man, in Publix. Give me my food. You know, we're going to do it. And so I think it's a very good step that the FHA have done, because there's a disparate impact on Hispanic and African Americans. This is a shocking statistic, and I was horrified when I read it. In the world, we make up 5% of the world's population in the United States. 5% of the world's population live in the United States. 50% of the world's prisoner population are housed in the United States. That's crazy. So because of that, our system is you know, our system is geared so that Hispanic people and people of color tend to end up on the wrong side of the law more quickly than white people. And then they're more injured by the disparate impact of people saying no felonies. So we as a company are not going to get on that. And as if you do put no felons into your advertising in any way, shape or form, you will incur the wrath of a lawsuit. And we hit one, and it wasn't our fault. We had one lawsuit, and it wasn't our fault. It was just our agent wasn't aware that they didn't write that in there. It was the landlord. But as soon as you represent a landlord, you become liable for them as well. So that's one thing I wanted to talk to you. Any questions or any comments on that? 50% of the world's prison population. And that was a few years back when that statistic was published. That just blew me away.
Yeah. I know that there is a subdivision, Gardens of Gulf Cove, where you have to do a background check.
That's fine.
To submit there, and I put that in there because they need to know.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious. I don't know what their.
They can do the background check,
but
they can't arbitrarily say no felons. So, you know, what about if they say no felons, and a guy that, you know, I know we had a real estate agent at in one office who had served time for murder. And when he was in college, he punched a guy in a bar, and it was a glass jaw. The guy went down and died. You know, it happened. And so he did 12 years and came out and ended up getting, you know, confessed it to the real estate board, got his real estate license. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he could be impeded from getting into you know, renting a house.
I don't know the details of why they need that information, but I know there are laws about sexual offenders have to notify people around them. And so I'm assuming that is the reason that they need that information.
And they can look to see if there's a person with felonies, if they're recent and if they're relevant. So someone that's got a felony for you know, aggravated assault or stealing cars when they were 19 years old and they're now 32 years old, that's not relevant. Okay. If they've got one a year before where they, you know, just got out after beating the neighbour's kid, then that's going to be relevant, and the housing authority could say, well, this is the reason why we didn't want this person in here. It doesn't give an absolute defence.
So the HOA could make that decision legally.
Legally, but they better have a good reason, and it can't just be a blanket. And the FHA write a very clever list of how the HOA can stay within the rules. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. Any other questions on that? It's called disparate impact. It always used to be in employment, and it's now getting into housing, which is very interesting. From a student of the law, I I love the way all these cases on that are argued.
So you said you're responsible once you're representing the landlord.
Mhm.
So if the landlord is in an interview with somebody and they make some lovely special statement, you're responsible for
No.
it? Okay.
You would have a great defense there that you were not in a position to stop that conversation from happening. But if you wrote it in the MLS, which is what happened in our case, then the landlord said, no, this is how I want it written.
Right.
And the agent hadn't got that knowledge of the FHA guidelines, then yes, the agent's liable, even though they didn't know. But if they were having an interview with someone, you can't control that.
Murray, there was, here a few months back, there was a big expose on all the fair housing violations that were going on with Long Island realtors. Is that something, there was steering. Is that something that is going on in other parts of the country? Was that a special population?
I'd like to think not, but I'm sure, I'm sure that the other parts of the country, there's still bad behaviour. And here's one that I heard of that was up in, I want to say in the St. Louis area, and this was interesting. It was an HOA subdivision, and there was I think it was like a 34, 40 houses in an HOA, and there was one realtor that lived in this subdivision, and they had a process where they had this, like the whiskey tasting club. They all had the skinny jeans and the beards and the belts that sort of hang down here and tight shirts and stuff. That was that type of people that lived there. So, and somehow this realtor was going out and recruiting people to come and live in their HOA in that particular area. Now, to me, they've got a case there. He is cherry picking who is going to come fight. And so my golden rule is we talk about property, not people. And I think what was happening in Long Island, they were talking about people rather than property. And if you want to, I dug into this because it just fascinated me. And I don't know if it's because I'm a foreigner as such, but I found it fascinating how much fantastic information is on the NAR website. You go into NAR website and look for the Fair Housing Month April. There's videos, there's documentaries that are made from film people. There's a movie on there starring the guy from so who was starred with John Travolta in that? He always swears at everything. Black guy.
Samuel Jackson.
Who?
Samuel Jackson.
Samuel Jackson. He's in this movie, and it's literally about steering. And great resources. I went to look up something because I was teaching a class, and then 8 hours later I got away from school. I got caught in this loop of reading it, but it'll fascinate you. And we as the real estate industry can put a stop to this. We can put a stop to it right now. And it just takes us to be mindful, and be bold enough to say, get out of my car when a buyer starts having conversations that you're uncomfortable with. Get them out of my car.
Or a seller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a Russian gentleman that started going down a path that I just looked at him and I said, stop. He said, if you persist, I'm walking out the door. I'm not taking your listing.
Yeah, and there's various forms that you can get into. I've heard people say they don't want to live in this particular area because of short-term rental, and they don't want tourists. That's fine. And that's fine. But when you start going deeper and deeper into it, then no, you're not going to work with us. I'd love to go out and get out of my car.
Okay, so
And you're new, you said you were.
I am.
That's good. We're all new ones.
So I know there are protected classes, right? And so the familial status is one of them. So I was talking to somebody one time and she said, well, my son, he's coming down, he wants to buy. Do you think, what do you think about Venice? Do you think it's too old? And so then I thought, so I'm thinking, okay, well, is age isn't a familial class?
Yeah, it's protected.
Is it protected?
Yeah. So age, orientation, I can't remember the anagram or whatever it's called now, the remembering thing. It's I can't remember. It's family, race, nationality. So you can say,
Right, but I didn't think age.
yeah, age is definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's an exception to that, which is the HOPA, the housing for older people. And they can do the 55 plus. That's one of the exceptions to the FHA guidelines.
Okay. So I told her I just couldn't say.
You
What
can
do I
say,
say?
so that's a great question you bring up. So how do you talk about something like this? So, so an old person comes down to Florida and says, I want to live in Florida. Where shouldn't I live?
Yeah.
Well, what don't you like?
Right.
I don't like noise. Well, don't go and live in Ybor City. I don't want motorbikes. Don't live in Daytona. And you can turn it back to their personal preference. That has nothing to do with the people.
Well, until they say the one thing they don't like.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we get people. I get people where we operate in. Where I originally operated in, my first office where I was a team leader was in Hunters Creek. I must have been the only person who didn't speak Spanish in the office. And in fact, I taught a class there once. We counted out how many countries were in the classroom. There was like over 30 people in the class, and there were 16 countries represented in the classroom. It is a big, big melting pot. But you get people can move up from Miami and they say, I want to live with Puerto Ricans, or I want to live with Dominican Republicans. I want to live, because there's like arguments in between these different Central American countries as well. And you just say, here is the property. I'm going to take you and show you some property because that is national origin. And they can go talk to neighbors, they can do it. They can make their decision themselves, but we're not going to facilitate that for you. I personally don't want to live next to English people because they want to borrow things off me. Seriously. Every time I've had an English neighbour, I borrow a drill. You can buy one. When I don't live here permanently, I don't need to own a drill, especially if you've got one. Anyway, it's a good thing, and as a real estate industry, we can definitely put a dent in and get this stopped. And
I think the most common one I've gotten is crime.
crime.
People want to know, is this a bad neighborhood?
That's
And I just
easy.
say,
You can go
just-
to the sheriff's office.
yeah, I just say, just, yeah,
Go to the sheriff's
just
office
research
website.
your local, yeah.
And it's like schools. Go to the education and you can look at the schools, but we can't be the ones that say things like that. Yeah, crime's a big one, and that's a very reasonable one to ask, but we're not experts at it.
Right.
So, and we may think it's a high crime area, and it's not,
Yeah.
because poor
Subjective.
doesn't necessarily equal
Right.
crime. So, I grew up in a very poor area, and there wasn't much crime. And yet you go to areas that are in between very poor and they were ridden with criminals because they got money because they stole it from someone else.
They were good criminals, they were good at it.
They were clever. They were criminals. The other thing I want to talk about is advertising. Just generally advertising. We run foul of, and the reason I want to talk about it is because the DBPR has started their enforcement again, and we've had quite a few. When I say we've had quite a few, remember I have 1,597 agents under my license. So when I say quite a few, it's a minor percentage, but it's enough to make me say, I'm thinking, oh, they're out there looking, and they're looking at your signs in the yard. They're looking at your Facebook pages. They're looking at any advertisements that you put out there, your mailers, and how you operate with telephones. So your signs must have clearly your brokerage, and your brokerage is Keller Williams Gold, Keller Williams Realty Gold, and that has to be on there in full. If you're operating as an agent using your own license name, size doesn't matter. If you're operating under a team name that's registered with the broker, the Keller Williams Gold, the letters, not the logo, the gold font has to be the same or larger than your team name. And we're agents in Keller Williams. So Keller Williams did this beautiful KW with gold realty emblems. They did it for every market center. Keller Williams St. Pete, they got KW St. Pete. That's not the brokerage name. So it would say somewhere on your sign, on your email footers, if you're using email to send out to customers as a means of marketing, then you should have clear. And I get emails from you guys that just say, you know, Bob Jones, Keller Williams. I have no clue which office they're from. So I look at the area code, and it's normally someone who's like Massachusetts, like, well, they moved down here. So you've got to have in all your advertising Keller Williams Realty Gold. And if it's on a sign and you're using a team name, it's got to be the same or smaller than the team. Sorry, same or bigger than the team name, the Keller Williams Gold. And what the DBPR are doing is they're just going around and photographing it and then serving a citation. And it's not a huge fine, but it's an annoying fine. And it can become big on the second or third offense. But the big expense is redoing all your signs.
What if your name was on there and a team name?
Still gotta have the Keller Williams Realty logo.
Well, you gotta have it on there, but it's
Yeah.
size of.
So if you had, yeah, the team name rule would still apply. And
If it's on there, then that applies.
yeah, it applies. Yeah, because the reason team name rule, this is really scary, this still. Now I'm scared to move.
Carnival, right?
Is it like an exercise still?
Yeah,
Apparently.
it is.
That's gonna be fun. The reason team rules came out is because people used to hide behind the team. So when someone wanted to make a complaint, they'd call the team leader of the Sunshine team and get the agent that had actually violated their rule that they were calling to complain about. And so they were policing themselves. And so now they wanted to let the public clearly know that this is who you're going to call. You're going to call Keller Williams Gold, and you're not going to call the Happy Sunshine team.
Yeah, I thought the font size thing even applied to individual agents
No.
too.
It nearly did, but there was an uproar from the broker committee at Florida Realtors because it would have just been so expensive to change everyone's signs. So they tried to put that in and then they dropped it. So it's literally, Jeff could have a little tiny
Yeah.
Keller Williams underneath.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I made mine equal because I thought it was a rule for everybody.
it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And why not? Keller Williams
Yeah.
is pretty well known now.
It's,
so-
yeah, it's an asset to have that name on
Yeah,
your sign.
when I first came to Keller Williams, God knows, 10 years ago, whatever it was, they taught you don't put Keller Williams, you brand yourself, which is, but now we have become the largest real estate company in the world, so why
That's
not?
something to brag about.
Why not ride on that train? Yeah. And then the other thing was advertising. Be careful with your mailers. There's increasingly complaints about how you mail to a subdivision and what you brag about. So this one agent wrote all the solds in this neighborhood. And when you looked at the card, it was as if she sold them all. There was no wording on there that said, these were from MLS statistics. The
So if you
last 30
say
days.
just sold and you list,
And listed all these, then
you have to say who sold them?
well, no, you just have to say these are sold from various brokerages in your subdivision garnered
something
from
that-
MLS. But if you just put it out like that, it's Article 12 of the Code of Ethics. It's false and misleading advertising, and also the agent didn't say where she was from, so it was.
Oh, even worse.
Well,
Yeah.
it just said KW Luxury on the front, and then the list of houses sold and for what prices. So obviously, when you throw a stone in any street and you'll hit a realtor.
Yeah.
And so 2,000 realtors got this mailing themselves, and my phone blew up.
Yeah, I bet.
So just be careful. And if you get any doubt, just send it to me and email it to me. I'd be happy to look over it and say, hey, this is going to cause you this problem. Okay. What was the other thing I wanted to talk about? Oh, real and personal property. And if you've been to my contract class, I thrashed this to death. I spend more time on real and personal property than I do on anything else, but it's what's costing you money. And I think I'm going to talk about things that cost you money more than anything, fines and real and personal property. If you're a listing agent, be very, very clear with your seller what is staying and what is going. And then if they and say to them, here is a piece of paper. If you suddenly, during this listing period, suddenly decide that you want to take that chandelier, let me know. And because what's happening is they're getting into contract, and that heirloom chandelier that's hanging in the hallway, they suddenly just think, oh my God, we want to take that with us. and it hasn't been excluded in the contract. So make sure that they're very clear. And it's that same old washer dryer thing. You know, be clear with the buyer what it is they want, and make sure that the seller, when you list it, hey, the buyer's likely to ask for this washer and dryer. Do you want it to go or don't you want it to go? What do you want to do? And remember, the MLS means nothing. Normally on Fridays, I get maybe 3 or 4 washer and dryer calls. They're starting to go down a bit now, but it's always. I'm going to open up a Murray's warehouse of washer and dryers to sell to realtors, and I'm going to brand them for you so that you can. Here's a gift for you. But it just breaks my heart when I think, oh God, why didn't I get that message to you? But it seems that you might just want to buy one now. If you just come into business, buy a washer and dryer, and just keep it in your car. I don't, I think a lot of them, there must be a high percentage of agents have either paid money to the buyer or seller to get out of trouble, or
why don't they put washer and dryer in that top part?
Because it was, I don't know. And on my own.
So if it's not in that top part and the seller says, I don't want to sell it, you have to add it into the excluded part, even though it's not in that part?
No, so washer and dryer,
Okay,
washer and dryer, but washer and dryer is not in the list of appliances. And I think it was all to do with the FHA. The FHA, you have to have a range.
Right.
So that was always in there.
Right.
Refrigerators, I guess, was just, it's plumbed in by the ice maker mostly. But dishwasher was plumbed in, but washer and dryer could be easily moved. And I don't know the history of it. I don't really want to know. But one of our offices actually has printed it into DocuSign. It's actually on the contract and you have to take it out. I think I want to leave it without having it in there, and just if the buyer wants it. Sometimes the buyer doesn't want something that someone's had their dirty socks in going around.
But sometimes it's not included and then the buyer asks for it and then they say, okay, if I need to be full price, I'll include it. So I don't want to put it in exclusions if I don't have to.
No, you don't have to exclude it.
Right.
But you would have to exclude, if the person's got like a fridge that's been handed down for generations, their college fridge, they don't want to let go, then make sure that gets excluded. But boy, we have some crazy arguments on Fridays. And as I mentioned earlier on, septic versus sewer, we had this whole 30-something, I think I got to in 1 year, of people who sold the house saying it was on sewer, and it turned out a month later when they had a little incident in the bathroom that it turned out it was on septic and the septic had failed, and everyone gets into each other's lawyers. Did you have one of them?
No, I have a question. Or maybe I did. I don't know. I have a confused about the difference between septic and sewer.
You want to know the difference? Good, that's a good question. I presume everyone knew. I must admit, when I first moved to this country, I had no clue what's going on. I found out they actually have them in England. I grew up for 31 years living in England, never knew there was such a thing as septic. But there is there as well. Not very often, it's in the country normally. But what a septic is, the business leaves the house and it goes into a massive tank buried in the ground under all your tulips and dahlias and daffodils.
It has to get pumped out.
That's why they grew so well. And I've never had one. I had them in Michigan, never had one pumped out ever.
Well, eventually.
So what it has,
The drain fields are working.
so you have it has
Eventually, yes.
Yeah. So this tank then leaches out through pipes, big cloth covered pipes out into the yard, and then just sinks into the aquifer. And then it goes back into the drinking water, then comes back to your house, and then you just try to repeat it again.
Nice.
That's septic.
So
That's septic.
that's septic. Sewer is where there's a big pipe that runs through every house in the city, and they take it off to the sewer farm, and then it's treated and then put back into
And then recycled.
But in Charlotte County, the septics have to be inspected.
Right.
So it's important for people to know that.
So,
Yeah, I had mine.
and if your buyer wants the septic inspected, you have to negotiate with the seller to have it drained prior to the inspection.
Oh, I did a state number.
And the guy comes along and he sticks a camera down it, and they run water into it to see if it's working.
So sewer will be like more in bigger cities like New York. I think in New York with them you have sewer.
Well, here
We have sewers here.
we have sewer here also.
Sewer
But
is
yes.
more common, but septic
bigger
seem more
cities.
remote.
Absolutely, yeah. They're not
You're
going to
talking about
septic
Northport, it's the other way around.
because otherwise Central Park would be very lush.
Northport has quite a bit of septics, right?
Almost all
Yeah,
septic.
that's
The
right.
only way that you can have sewer in Northport is if you are on the same line, same street as a city building. That's your guarantee.
Oh, okay.
The only way you can get off of the well is if we're on the same line as a fire hydrant. So I always tell people to go look for the fire hydrant when you're gonna buy.
So Northport's
It's a
all
good
about
trick.
septic.
Yeah. Cause it's huge. Northport is bigger than Sarasota for land.
And South Gulf Cove and Rotunda has what they call a mini septic. So they have the sewer line and they don't pay for any service from the county. The county services it, but there is like a mini septic that pumps the stuff from their house to the sewer. And that's all maintenance by the county. It doesn't cost them anything, but technically it's a
So when
septic.
you're listing a property, you say to the buyer, do you have septic or sewer? I would imagine they obviously don't know. A lot of the times they won't know because I wouldn't have had all these problems.
Right.
And we only have had one this year and that was this week. So we're training it out of people. But now we've got Englewood coming on with me. I'm just gonna make sure you guys know. I want you to be number one in the number two business. I saw that on the back of a septic. So there's one if you drive to France.
They have some crazy taglines on the
Is it-
septic trucks.
No, they have it painted on the tank.
There's worse ones than that.
I've seen political promises, and then I saw one the other day. It was yellow and had like painting down the side of it with kids in the window, and it was called the stool bus.
See?
You can go on there. There's a website.
Yeah, I believe that, like I said. there's
Anyway.
worse.
Back to nice things. So I completely lost my train of thought. So the one thing you can do is ask for the water bill when you're at the listing appointment. Ask for their latest water bill because if they're on sewer, it will be on the water bill as a charge. So as a percentage. So. And then you can, of course, when you buy a swimming pool, put a swimming pool in, you always call the water people up and say, I'm going to put in 23,000 gallons into my swimming pool, and they'll stop the sewer charge because sewerage is a percentage of the water you use. So that's a good tip if you've got someone who's building a pool with and they're on sewer to make sure they call the water company. Yeah, it's a lot of money. A lot of money. In Michigan, when I lived in Michigan, Northville, at the beginning of the summer, you used to pay the fire department $100 and they come in and fill your pool for you. And the wife used to get to see firemen in swimsuits. I didn't realise for 5 years.
Constantly draining the pool.
The firemen are coming. The firemen are coming. Baking cakes and.
Water looks a little cloudy.
Yeah, well, they weren't exactly magic nuts. I can tell you that. They were more like, Budweiser Bertie.
Yeah.
Dear Lord. And then the other thing that is has causing people problems is getting into bad communication arguments. So when you are communicating with anyone on email or text, it's very easy in the evening to get carried away with the whole keyboard warrior. Just if you are angry, and I know you will get angry in transactions because they're just very frustrating. If you want to say something bad, just type it all out onto an email, stick it into drafts, wake up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, and then reread it. And then imagine it in the Realtor magazine as an example of how this is what Jeff Ducey wrote to Katie Smallwood. I'm reading names off the back here. In a vodka-fueled rage at 11:30 at night. You just keep it very factual. And if you think like if you read attorneys, when attorneys communicate, they're just straight to the point. And so right now I have a situation where my agent is has the listing and the pool heater doesn't work. I got an email from the buyer's agent saying that much email. There's nothing in real estate that you need to write more than that. There's nothing. So this much email saying how we're going to get sued because we didn't disclose that the pool heater didn't work. Well, what a pointless lot of waste of time and energy. It's simply the pool heater doesn't work. Here's an addendum, present to the seller, we want the pool heater fixed. The fact that whether the seller knew the pool heater was working is nothing for the realtors to worry about. We can't be arguing about that. That's between the buyer and seller. If the buyer thinks that the seller didn't disclose this, and knew about the pool heater not working, then they may have some kind of case against them. Not a very strong case, because it's quite easy to find out whether the pool heater is working or not. It's not hidden up in the attic somewhere. So, you know, don't waste your time. If it's more than 1 inch to 2 inches long, your email, it's most probably something in there that you don't really need. And you know, just lay out the facts and then preface it. One way you can get out of a lot of trouble is prefacing everything you write with "the seller has asked" or "the buyer has asked," and then the seller has asked me to present this request for the buyer. They would like some time after closing to stay in the property, whatever it is. And which brings me on to my next one. I know comedians, they have like 3 words on the floor to make them remember.
Prompts, yeah.
So it goes on, but that one gave me the cue for the next one, and I'm going to forget it when I think of it. So what was I talking about?
Oh, you picked on the wrong person.
Well, you've got the inspiration award. I mean, that's a qualification there. They
Isn't
really
that
push the boat out on these awards, don't they?
Yeah, isn't that nice?
It's beautiful.
So, what was I talking about?
No.
Oh, not arguing.
No, not brief comments.
So what did he do and make it
Getting to the
smaller?
point.
Get to the point.
Yeah.
And just the seller has requested, the buyer has requested, and that will save you. You know, if you think about my role, my day is conflict. I most probably have every day is a lot of conflict. I've got brokers shouting at me for what my agents have done. Your agent's done this, your agent's done that. They must be just eating themselves alive. I couldn't live like that. I couldn't go to bed at night having all that stress and strain in my life. But if my agent has done something wrong, it's fact. There's a fact in it. It's not an emotion, it's a fact. So we remove all the emotions from it. So when the Remax broker called me up down in the town where I live, actually, and I said, oh, thank you, really appreciate you telling me that. Do you think you could put it in an email for me so I've got something to talk to when I meet with my agent? And that just diffuses them. They've got it out of the system, I'm sure. But I can't afford to do that when I don't need to be shouting at anyone, another broker, about what their agent's done. A simple, you know, can you explain why this happened today? Let them come back to me, and we've done our job. Because the only reason I want to complain about another agent's behavior mostly is to go back to a buyer or seller and say, this is the response from the broker. It doesn't need to be an emotional argument. Emotions are for weddings and funerals, not for real estate. And once you get the emotion out of real estate, it's the easiest job in the world, because it's just like a tennis match. Here's our offer, here's our acceptance, here's our repair request, here's our refusal. It's just it's basically what it is. And there's absolutely no need. We buy into the emotion because they're buyer and seller. They can be emotional, but we're just going to be unemotional.
Yeah.
And I know what I was going to talk about is lease. When I said the seller wants to stay in the property after closing, one of them, and if I do that 11 ways real estate agents get into trouble, and I keep thinking each year I'll do a new list, but the same list keeps going every year. It's the same 11 things. I'm hoping to add some other thing to it, so it can be the 12. We just don't like 11. But the same thing that keeps coming up, and it's real estate agents writing lease terms into a contract, or into an addendum, and not understanding what a lease term is. So we traditionally think of a lease term as, you know, March the 1st to March 1st, 2023, person's going to live there. That's clear, that you know that's a lease. But it's the hidden leases that catch us out. So if you think about when you rent a storage unit, you go to the storage unit place to put all the junk that you really should just throw away. Please, people, throw this stuff away. We don't need to keep it for the kids to throw away when you go. That's what my kids told me. We've got photographs we're never going to look at. A wedding album we're never going to open. But anyway, they're in there. But you sign a lease when you go to rent that place. So when you say in a contract, the seller will leave furniture in the garage for a week after closing, you've created a lease term. And it's a secretly hidden lease, but you're allowing someone to use property that belongs to someone else for their purposes. So that's a lease. And that would be likely to be a felony, because it's the only person that can write a lease term is an attorney. And if you're writing a lease term, then you may be committing unlicensed legal practice. But just be careful. We had one which said the seller will remain in the property the night of closing. That's clearly a lease. And would have, I bet you 99 times out of 100, it would never have been found out. Nothing would have happened. They would have moved out and everyone would have gotten their life and the realtor would never got into trouble. But he had a house to himself. He was a single guy and it wasn't his house anymore. It was a party. And the place got trashed.
Wow.
So where do you think they come to complain?
Yeah.
The buyers. They turned up there and there were cakes on the lawn. And
Wow.
I managed to get out the back door before it all happened. Hey.
So how do you go about a situation like that? If there's going to be, is that just between the buyer and the seller?
Buyer and the seller, all lawyers. And what you say to them is, you know, if it's prior to being executed, so if the seller says, look, I'm going to go under contract, but I want to make sure that the buyer's going to let me stay a week after closing. You use rider U, the rider U uniform, rider U, the seller's occupancy after closing. And if the buyer says, I want to be in by March the 1st, or where are we now, May the 1st, I don't mind closing on May the 16th, but I need to be in the property on May the 1st, then we'd use rider T, which is the pre-occupancy by buyer. And that tells them to go away and get a lease drawn up by an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
It also gives them a right to cancel if they don't get a lease. So we don't use that after we're executed. What we do after we're executed, and they suddenly decide they have to be in there, we say, okay, you guys go away and get a lease written up, or you can write it up yourself. But I don't have nothing to do with it, because I'm going to come on closing day or the day before closing. We're going to do our walkthrough, and then we close, and whatever happens after closing, we're done.
Between you guys.
And it's a good thing, and it's a great question, Jeff, because it's a good thing to remember is the moment closing day occurs, we are done. Anything that happens after closing day, we have no dog in that hunt. Mm-hmm. So when that buyer calls you up and says, you know, 3 days after closing, I just flushed the toilet and we're on septic, not sewer, you say, oh dear, I can't help you. If I do anything, I'll be practicing law. Therefore, the best thing I can do is reach out to the seller, ask for their contact information, and put you two together. And if they won't give us the contact information, you have to speak to an attorney, because I can't represent any dispute after closing because my job's done. I have if it happens to you, I keep a load of sort of, what do you call it, scripts in my phone for every situation I can think of. I just put them in there and then I just cut and paste and I'll send it to you. So if that happens, I can send you that suggested script of talking to your buyer that suddenly found that they've got, you know, the pool didn't work, pool pump didn't work, or they went up in the attic and found, you know, marijuana farm or something.
It wasn't time to
I could
Sell seller wants it back.
I'll bring it over to get rid of it for you. The electricity bill will go down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Florida's, you know, a very simple state for real estate. You know, if people that move down from New York and New Jersey and these older states up there, they all imagine that we're going to be not doing what we do. We do quite a lot for the buyers and sellers here compared to what's in the attorney states. So we have to be careful that they don't ask us to do more than we should be doing, appoint them to an attorney. There was supposed to be something in that last section that reminded me of something I want to talk about. But I'm getting towards I have 1 minute left for me to talk, and then for your questions.
Sally's wrong.
So I'll go for your questions. What bothers you, George Heather?
No, I was just saying, my guess for where that was supposed to lead you was something about Sally's role, because you were looking for the attorney conversation.
Yeah, well,
That's
you know,
where you were headed.
so the rules of the court are, you know, Sally can't represent you or me or anyone because you're not her client. She's my partner. I have, I went to law school. I don't hold a license in Florida. I got my stuff up north. I haven't done anything with it down here. So I don't practice. And Sally can represent you, but there will be nothing to do with Keller Williams. But she helps me as my partner, obviously, to advise you as a broker would, but with a lot more in-depth knowledge. So we're lucky to have her around, and she helps me write stuff because she can write stuff for me and put a stamp of approval on anything I write as well. So
Nice.
It's a good
Big benefit.
Good symbiotic partnership. New word that I learned. So yeah, she's pretty much is there when I'm not here as well. Because like Thursday, I'm on a plane Thursday afternoon for a couple of hours, so she'll just take the reins for a while. She got the calm. Just don't wear a red shirt because you will get shot. What question do you have? What's the hardest thing that you find in real estate? Let's ask you that question. What thing do you think, I just don't have a clue what that is, I don't want to waste any time learning about it? What confuses you? I know it's a horrible question, put you on the spot, but answer it.
Okay, well, one thing that confuses me is in the DocuSign with all of these documents that have to be signed. That
confuses me as well. So
it's a pain sometimes.
This is the man. This is the man.
And I've called him before.
I honestly don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
If someone needs me to look at a document, I normally ask them to send it to me on a PDF because I was saying at the break that I just haven't got the time to go in and really learn it. So I wasn't an early person using it.
I understand the concept behind it. Is that we have so many forms for our buyers and sellers to sign to keep the E&O down.
Right.
And that's kind of
There shouldn't be that
saying
many.
Saying to them now, and like, because you got the broker relationship, you got the single agent transition
Right.
this agent, then that agent, and then they just look at me and they're like, what the heck is this?
Do you know what I would do? And this is what this is. I'm a visual person. I don't like computers. Forms on computers.
Yeah.
So in here, I have my as-is contract, I have my standard contract, I have my riders, I have my land stuff, I have listing agreement, miscellaneous forms, commercial, blah, blah, blah. I have it all in paper. So I would have a listing pack. In fact, my contract was laminated but then they came out with a new one last year, so I put it that way. But I just would keep a master set of forms in paper so that you could be familiar with them, and then you can talk about them to your party. And I think maximum is going to be 9 forms, I would think, for any transaction.
I think I just need to start creating, like you've got there, some cheat sheets so that I can quickly just explain everything.
You can't remember everything.
Yeah.
And just having the forms printed out and keeping them up to date is, I have been guilty of missing that. But just have all I've got every single rider in here. And how often do we use the seawall? Well, maybe you do. In Orlando, we never use the seawall one. We very used, rider otherwise the insulation one for new homes. But they're good to have. Rezoning contingency, rider R. How many times have we used that? Very rarely. But it's good to have them because it will come up. And also, the contract is 12 pages. The is 12 pages long.
Yeah.
And there must be times where you're thinking, what can I read?
Oh, yeah.
I could have to put it in the bathroom.
I'm not glad living in it's like eating an elephant. You just become really, really good at one page every month. And in a year, you've got the contract absolutely mastered. And it's so nice for a buyer or seller, not that you're interpreting it, but when they say to you, well, this was an Airbnb, this property that we're buying. What happens to the bookings after we close? And the answer's in the contract.
Right.
We say what we'll do is we'll check paragraph 6B, and that says the property is going to be occupied by a tenancy or lease after contract. And then you're going to look and read standard D, which is in the standards, and it's going to tell you that the buyer and seller have a certain amount of time to exchange lease information of the old tenancies or the new tenancies after closing, and what's going to happen to all the deposits. It's all in there. So pretty much every question. And when you And I know you've got a lot to do. You're trying to find customers, you're keeping the customers, and you most really don't have time to sit there every morning and read a couple of paragraphs of the contract. But if you did really focus on just a page a month, I try and pick something every year to learn different, like capitals, state capitals, world capitals. This year I failed miserably. My daughter wanted me to do pi to 100 figures, 3.17, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, right, she gave me enough time. She's a 5th grade maths teacher. And on 3/17, I was going to go to her classroom and do the pi, because she has pi day. She puts pi out on the tables and they talk about pi, pi, the math thing. Failed miserably because I took my mind off it. I'm sure you could learn 5 numbers a week. So you could learn a page a day. But I want to just tell you that I failed miserably.
You should have just came up with 100 pies.
100 pies. Well, I did buy the pies. So pick, no, I don't know. I don't even know it's 10 at the moment.
When she brought up the brokerage relationship thing, a question came up in my mind. How we have them sign the single agency agreement, the transition to the transaction. When I first started with Keller Williams in classes, we learned, that we're able to do the single agency representation and that it's better for your customer. I use that. And then I say we transition to the transaction when I'm dealing with somebody else from my own brokerage, because the law sees us as the same person. We're all under the same broker. So then in that case, we're definitely transactional. But I'm told that other agencies don't allow their agents to be a single agent for liability reasons.
I allow this office and the Sarasota office only because of Michael Saunders. None of my other offices are allowed to be single agents.
And why is that? Because
it's dangerous. So, the cameras.
Okay.
So it's dangerous, and I want to be careful how I speak here.
I just want to understand. Because
I come to you and have you ever seen totally honest people? I'm a totally honest person on Saturday Night Live. I come to you and say, I'm going to represent you as a single agent. And thank you. So what does that mean, Mr. Agent? I said, well, I'm going to represent you solely. I'm going to be loyal, I'm going to be obedient, and we're going to have a fiduciary relationship, which a transaction broker doesn't have. I am going to speak as you. I'm going to stand in your shoes and I'm going to be able to negotiate. Great. Also, if I do anything wrong, you're liable as well. Mr. Seller, you okay with that? Oh no, I'm not. So if you were really honest about single agency, and most people in Florida don't understand the difference between single and transaction broker.
Yet we all sign that form.
We all sign that form. Now, in commercial deals, yes. So a true single agent is this. When I was working in corporate America, the guy who sat in the office next to me was the real estate broker for Borders, Books and Music. He would leave the office in the morning, get on a plane, go out to meet land people in Coral Gables and say, yeah, this is exactly what I want for a store. I'll sign here on behalf of Borders Books. That is a single agent. It's not, you're really acting as a transaction because you're still going back to the seller and saying, or the buyer and saying, what do you want me to do? You're not making decisions on their behalf. There is some parts of it where you're making decisions and you're negotiating for them, but transaction brokers do that as well. It's very hard to tell on the phone whether they're, sometimes you could ask them, are you a single agent or a transaction broker? Orlando, no one does single agency. No one does single agency in Orlando. Very rarely would you ever find a single agent.
So why are we doing here?
It's tradition. It's just happened. It's like, Sarasota and Manatee County, what buyer pays for title and one and seller pays another. It's just become traditional because of Michael Saunders, because Michael Saunders tend to tout that in their advertising. We act for you
so
as a
that's
single
where it
agent.
comes from. Michael Saunders was saying they are single agents and no one else is. So now we're going to be single agents.
Yeah,
so
they were trying to say we act as your
that,
fiduciary. Basically, that's all it was.
I didn't know the history behind it because
I'd love to stop it, but I just know it's entrenched here. So I just have to be careful because the moment you show her listing, I'm at risk of dual agency.
Well, I do know that much. I make it very clear, that this is the single agency and these are the things. Honestly, when you read those, they're so
nobody
it's hard
understands
to
them.
tell the difference.
Agents don't understand. Why would the public understand it?
Yeah, exactly. So when I explain it, I just say that I'm going to represent you, and if there is anything that you feel you want disclosed for the good of the offer, then we'll discuss it before it's disclosed.
safest form is transaction broker for me. I would never, if I was working as an agent, I would always be a transaction broker.
But I do make it clear that if anyone from our agency is involved on the other side of it, then it's automatically transactional because we are the same.
So that is all Orlando agents never have to have that conversation. They never have to say, I'm providing you with all this service, however. Because you throw a stone in Orlando area and you're going to hit a Keller Williams agent. They're all showing.
Not just any Keller Williams, just our brokerage.
Just your brokerage.
Right.
So I can have, and I'm in a, I have to be very careful. You'll find that I rarely talk about commissions because I'm one of the largest brokers in Florida. I can't price fix. Okay. So I'm never going to talk about commissions and say, right, we're going to charge this much.
Right.
But I don't want to get accused of that. And then, you should think of it. I have in Orlando, a lot of times I have agent from Hunters Creek will call me up and say, can you call the broker at Lake Nona? And I'll go, yeah, sure. Hey, Murray. So I have arguments between two agents where I'm both the broker on both sides. It makes it easy because we can resolve stuff quicker. But
that's kind of like when you have the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, I couldn't,
it's easier to me.
But it makes a mockery of it, doesn't it? When although I'm the broker of Sarasota, you could show as a single agent at Sarasota, it's the same person, but not the same entity. So the law looks at the entity, not the person.
But when you end up representing both, then you're transactional anyway. Just automatically.
Yeah, and a lot of agents think that when you're transactional because you're doing both sides, which is not the case. We're transactional if we're not single agent.
Right.
And the presumption is we're all transaction brokers unless we say otherwise. The only time I would advise you not to be a transaction broker or a single agent is when you're dealing with a FISBO, is to serve them with a no brokerage relationship form. And then you don't owe them as many duties. So if you don't, you're dealing with them.
Like if you're the buyer.
You're representing the buyer and you're dealing with FISBO.
With it, okay.
You're representing that FISBO as a transaction broker unless you state otherwise. So you would advise doing the. I would advise with no brokerage. Yeah. I've talked to you for long enough.
So Murray, I came out of Coldwell Banker and we were transaction brokers. and but the problem that I was a managing broker for 6 years, my problem there was that my agents acted like single agents. In fact, they called people their clients because that sounded more professional. And I said, no, it's a customer.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody's confused about their roles.
Right. And that's come about because of this, I get on really well with Michael Saunders, we're on the same committee together, and I know a couple of her sub-brokers, and they're very good, professional, want to do the right thing all the time. Whenever I've gotten into disputes with them, they've always been great to deal with. But they do this thing where they advertise, we represent you as a single agent and we are your fiduciary. And that has caused this, everyone wants to, I would love it if everyone said, let's just be transaction brokers, because it just doesn't really matter. It doesn't, it's fluff. And in this day and age, you're going to get just as great service from a transaction broker. But you're right, I know people call me and say, oh, I've got this client. I don't correct them anymore. I've never seen anyone go to court on it, but I was talking to Sally and she said that sometimes they will infer a fiduciary relationship because you've been talking about them as a client rather than as a customer.
But is there anything wrong with that if you want to be a single agent, if you want that?
No, not really. I just don't see the benefit of it.
It's just a psychological thing.
Yeah, it is. The seller don't know. I don't know the difference. Okay. Sure, real estate brokers don't know the difference. So I've read articles about it, and I've come away more confused than. So how is a person that's not in real estate going to know?
Yeah.
And if you think about agency, not as sports agents, if you think about them, they're acting as what a single agent is. They're going out and negotiating contracts for their celebrity, because the celebrity doesn't want to get their hands dirty. That's what a true single agent is, and we're not doing that.
Right.
Look at you, Canadians.
They said the thing's on vibrate.
Right, I've got a few more minutes and then I must depart to my interview. What else you got?
I have to go.
don't blame you. You've got to go and get that frame
Yeah.
hung on your wall.
Get it framed.
What you got? Well, you should put up all my contact information, and then if it's not urgent, just email me. And if you need anything signed, and it's not, I think they've got my stamp here now. But if you need something DocuSign, just send it. My assistant goes through that most of the day and gets that taken care of. And I'm just trying to work with MLS to get this office, what they call firmed.
What does that mean?
Means that I can start editing and messing around with your listings if I have to. I get those compliance notices. Oh God, it's crazy. They warn you 3 times about stuff, and people still get fined. Okay. Oh, one thing you got to do is change your email address. If you haven't changed your email address with the DBPR, make sure they've got your most current email address. And now that's a 10-day. When you have to change your address on your estate license, they've now added email address to that penalty as well. So if you haven't got your most current email address, do a change form. It's free. You can do it on myfloridalicence.com, but make sure you've got your most recent one. Because if they email you and it bounces back, they'll come after you. They've got nothing better to do.
So if you still have to send one that you signed up with.
Exactly, and then most people change to their KW one.
Right.
But if you still have your other one, then you're.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, one that they can get in touch with you on, because they're trying to send notices out by emails now. That's it, man. That's all I've got. You've exhausted me. Every bit of knowledge has been taken.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you,
I'm so
Murray.
excited to finally get down here. It's like the